As the Civic Holiday Weekend 2021 comes and goes, 100 years ago on that holiday Monday, the official opening ceremony of the Ashburnham, now better known as the Hunter Street Bridge, was planned but never occurred. Hello, I'm Graham Hart, your host for the next half hour as your TV presents a pictorial history of the planning for and development of the bridge, based on research by Trent Valley Archives with the help of Steve Russell, a grandson of John E. Russell, a principal in the Russell Townsend Company that ultimately built the bridge. For nearly 2 centuries, there has been a bridge across the Otonabee River at Hunter Street, linking downtown Peterborough with the village of Ashburnham, today more commonly referred to as East City. During the first 100 years, there were 4 variations of bridges, 2 wooden structures, and 2 iron bridges, all of which went from bank to bank, spanning 250 feet. The second bridge, built across the Otonabee in 1846, was the impressive Howe Truss Bridge. This 1876 iron bridge, after 45 years in use, was still considered serviceable, and there were plans to relocate it at a London Street crossing, but it was found to be too short to reach both shores. In 1901, the Quaker Oats building was constructed beside that bridge. Pedestrian and vehicular travel were often in those days interrupted by railroad traffic, bringing oats and grains to the plant and packaged cereals from the plant, resulting in major traffic delays and frustrated motorists trying to use the bridge, a problem that would be exacerbated by the increasing popularity of the automobile. On the morning of December 11, 1916, a tragic fire and explosion occurred at the Quaker Oats plant that would ultimately claim 24 lives. Some major restructuring and changes to the bridge design had to be considered to entice Quaker Oats to rebuild and remain in Peterborough. Quaker had spent over $1 million to rebuild the London Street Dam and Power Station in 1912 and was employing 500 workers daily to convert 35,000 bushels of grain into a wide range of products. After weighing its options and some city negotiations, Quaker Oats made the decision to stay. To reduce automobile congestion, a new bridge design would be required to allow freight trains to pass under the bridge so as not to obstruct vehicle traffic. But to allow this, the bridge's dimensions would have to be much longer and much higher. Meanwhile, Quaker Oats had decided to increase the size of its factory. The large oatmeal plant completed May of 1918. Construction of the new bridge would start in October the following year. A labor shortage caused by Peterborough's strong response to the First World War was being reversed as troops began returning home at war's end. And there'd be a variety of jobs awaiting them, including the building of a temporary bridge, operating steam shovels, pouring concrete, laying foundations, and a number of finishing tasks. A further enticement was the fact the city was paying union scale rates on the bridge project. It was a golden era for construction workers in Peterborough. The rebuilding of Quaker Oats employed about 600 construction and tradespeople, and building a new bridge, eventually named the Ashburnham Bridge, created many jobs for suppliers and road construction crews. The city expropriated land adjacent to the bridge, which provided much of the gravel for the project, and would lead to the building of East City Bowl, part of what is now James Stevenson Park. Between April 1919 and June 1921, Peterborough's job picture was improving. Men were generally able to find work. Carpenters in 1920 commanded the highest salary before World War II. $6.80 for a 10-hour day. However, costs were also rising sharply. January of 1917, rent for a 6-room house was between $8 and $14 per month, but in January of 21, it was between $18 and $30 a month. Pork rose from 25 cents a pound to 39 cents. Milk went from 9 cents a quart to 13 cents. Eggs at roughly 50 cents a dozen in 1917 increased to more than 75 cents a dozen over the next 4 years. In September of 1918, on the recommendation of city engineer R.H. Parsons, Peterborough City Council chose a young Frank Barber to spearhead the building of the Ashburnham Bridge. Frank Barber had the vision, imagination, and skill to propel just about any project. The contemporary Prince Edward Viaduct on Bloor Street, Toronto, considered Barber's most famous construction accomplishment. Barber's reputation before building the bridge in Peterborough had been fashioned by his work on other reinforced concrete bridges. Between 1909 and 1918, Frank Barber had built 20 concrete bridges with open spandrel arches across the province. In Peel, York, one in Haliburton, and others in various Ontario counties. Barber's earlier bridges had clear spans ranging between 40 and 91 feet. At 235 feet, the Ashburnham Bridge was at the time of its construction the longest of any reinforced concrete bridge in Canada and 14th worldwide. It would use 14,000 cubic feet of concrete and 170 tons of reinforcing steel. The original plans called for 17,000 cubic feet of concrete and 250 tons of steel. The president of Quaker Oats, John Stewart, had pushed persuasively for a steel cantilever bridge. Such bridges had recently been built in Quebec City and New York City. But as Barber noted, there were safety issues, and they required frequent maintenance and painting. And in the few years since 1915, the price of building steel bridges had risen faster than that of concrete bridges. It was for those reasons Barber recommended the city build a high-level reinforced concrete arch bridge over the Otonabee. He argued that since the first reinforced concrete bridge had been built in 1889, technology had improved significantly. Engineers were able to calculate more closely the impact of traffic on bridges and could design bridges with more elasticity. Concrete bridges could look very heavy, but engineers and architects were more aware that the weight of the bridge could be lightened, especially by having open spandrels in the arches. Several articles, many written by Frank Barber himself, appeared in the publication Canadian Engineer that discussed aspects of concrete arch bridges. Barber also thought there would be less stress on the central arch if one applied principles of elasticity to the skewback in the crown. Elsewhere, Barber discussed how to design concrete curves in arches to ensure load bearing was even. After calculating the weight of the floor system and the depth of the arch ring, the engineer could then change the depth of the arch to reflect dead load stresses. Though Peterborough City Engineer R.H. Parsons estimated the cost of the bridge at $300,000, ratepayers in 1918 approved only $245,000. Tenders were called, and of the 10 companies that looked at the plans, only 3 submitted quotes, ranging from just under $340,000 to just over $380,000. None was accepted, and the incoming 1919 City Council was forced to pick up the pieces. The mayor and aldermen considered a number of changes to the bridge in an effort to stay within the ratepayers' most recently approved $270,000 figure. With the post-war drop in steel prices, might it now be feasible to build the bridge with structural steel or wrought iron instead of concrete? Frank Barber, still the consulting engineer, persuaded City Council to stay with concrete. He reviewed expense estimates with those given by contractors the previous year and was convinced he could cut costs to an acceptable level. A new call for tenders for the concrete high-level bridge design with an April 1st, 1919 deadline garnered 13 submissions, with bids ranging from $260,000 to $300,000. The Board of Works, acting as the bridge committee, then tried to get new quotes with a guaranteed total, but fluctuating wage demands made that impossible. Council had insisted on union scale for skilled and unskilled workers, and there were fears many costs might rise over the anticipated 2-year-long lifespan of the project. 3 of the 13 bids drew some support from the 5-member Board of Works and 11-member Council, and after dealing with several injunctions raised over Council's exceeding its authority by accepting a bid of more than $270,000, and charges by Ashburnham citizens that Council had delayed the construction of the bridge for far too long, Mayor Duncan, on July 15, 1919, signed a deal for $300,000 with the Toronto firm Russell Townsend Contractors, which had its own cement plant and was well experienced in the building of concrete bridges. It had actually been Barber who had persuaded John E. Russell, the wizard behind the Toronto waterfront, to consider overseeing the construction of the new bridge. Russell had a sterling reputation for building roads, and one of the contractors on Barber's great Prince Edward Viaduct project in Toronto. Russell's partner, Charles J. Townsend, would be in charge of the on-site details of the project. In the publication Canadian Engineers, Barber claimed the construction throughout, with the exception of the central or river arch, is of reinforced concrete, and with the exception of the joints at the skewbacks and crown, there is no steel in the river arch. In order to reduce the weight on the central arch, the roadway was filled with cinders rather than loam. Barber said he could reduce the shrinkage in the concrete by shooting dense sand cement mortar into the joints when the temperature was at 45 degrees Fahrenheit, deemed Peterborough's average annual temperature. After a short break, we'll have more on the building of the Hunter Street Bridge. Hello again, and welcome to the story of building the Ashburnham Bridge. In 1993, the local engineering society prepared a plaque describing the Ashburnham Bridge as an unreinforced concrete bridge. But the bridge is perhaps better described as a reinforced bridge, with a well-designed central arch that is less reinforced. Claude Fayette Bragdon, a New York architect, author, and theatrical set designer, gave the bridge its good looks. Architecturally, Bragdon was influenced by Louis Sullivan, a major Chicago architect, and by the arts and crafts movement. His major architectural works were First Universalist Church, the Chamber of Commerce building, and the New York Central Railroad station in Rochester. Barber, meantime, had already been working on several concrete truss bridges in Ontario, including 2 with Bragdon: the 1917 Leaside in Toronto and the 1919 Valley Inn Bridge in Hamilton. The Peterborough design was completed in November 1918, but Bragdon was back working on the bridge plans in early 1919. Peterborough's new city council members wanted to reduce costs on the bridge, and Bragdon had to make the roadway narrower, and so the planned streetcar line to Ashburnham was scrapped. Also, instead of going the full length of the bridge, the terracotta panels, also called faience, only appeared in the railings above the central arch of the bridge. Those terracotta rosettes were inspired by the Roman Temple of Mars, and when designing the panels, Bragdon consulted the Atlantic Terracotta Company in New Jersey, which at the time monopolized the production of architectural terracotta. Some of the replacement panels for a bridge restoration in the 1990s came from that same New Jersey company. From a design perspective, the bridge was much longer than earlier bridges, partly because it was so much higher. That meant the approaches began some distance from the river. This augmented the curvature of the bridge. The roadway was a distinct S shape. Though interestingly, when working on the perspectives or the view of the bridge from a distance, the visual effect is that the bridge is straight. The defining characteristic of this bridge is the central arch, with 10 internal arches placed between the central arch and the roadway. This open spandrel, a design signature of Bragdon's work, proved practical when building a long arch as the weight of fill in the spandrels was less. It required more complex framing, but far less concrete. This became a feature of reinforced concrete bridges, such as the Ashburnham Bridge, because of its attractiveness and the fact that steel reinforcing gave added strength. The relationship between the architect and the engineer is often mysterious. In this case, Frank Barber hired Claude Bragdon, with whom he shared important information. Barber set the limits, but Bragdon handled the design and aesthetics, and it proved a fortuitous partnership. The building of such an impressive civil engineering project of necessity had political implications. City councils were elected for one-year terms, and the bridge was built over 4 council years. J.J. Duffus was mayor in 1918 and deserves much credit for getting the project started. Every council had to deal with the bridge, and each seemed nervous about the project, in part because of increasing costs in an economy experiencing a downturn. Still not completed in July of 1921, the City Council of the day was getting increasingly anxious, and Mayor McIntyre, a contractor by trade, called a special meeting of council with a view to winding up the project and to plan an official bridge opening for August 8th during the 1921 Civic Holiday. Council had the idea that the original contract could be terminated and the remaining work done by city employees supervised by the Board of Works of City Engineer R.H. Parsons. The view seemed to be that placing the railings and chipping the bridge finish was all that remained to be done. The chipping was protection for the concrete, and its brown tones were meant to complement the rosettes and suggest the bridge was rooted in nature. Mayor McIntyre was quite clear that the chipping was not necessary and that there had been other instances of wasted expenses. The mayor said there could be further savings if some of the, quote, top-priced project employees, workmen scarcely the word, and foremen a trifle too specific, were eliminated from the job site. He was sure public opinion supported ending the unnecessary expenditures. But people clearly liked the bridge's appearance, with its decorations that could easily be viewed from the roadway. The bridge was one of Canada's major construction projects and regarded as its safest. Yet the Examiner, the last standing of Peterborough's 3 daily newspapers, had consistently been quite negative about the bridge, regarding it as too expensive and less important than a new sewage system would have been. It was perhaps due to sensitivity to that criticism that Council tried to hasten the final stages of its construction and to dictate what costs the city should pay. But it could not act unilaterally, certainly not without the approval of Frank Barber, and Council was forced to backtrack, with some embarrassment felt by the lawyers who had supported the belt-tightening measures. Barber believed the contractors had done what was expected and had done so with due care to safety and professionalism. And so those workers stayed on the task of completing the bridge. One local writer, C. Hamilton, characterized the bridge as a massive and handsome structure spoiled by the insertion of those tawdry green tiles. Another commentator claimed the display of hues on the bridge rivaled anything seen outside Barnum and Bailey circus wagons. At a subsequent special meeting, members of council were quick to apologize for some of the termination rhetoric. Alderman Turner expressed his wish to withdraw anything that might have been construed to have meant the contract was not carried out to the best of their abilities and within appropriate time limits. Alderman Gordon, who had seconded the initial motion, added, "There was no desire on the part of any member of this council to reflect on the integrity or the ability of the Russell Townsend Company to carry out the contract well and properly." Council's only intent, he maintained, was to terminate certain overhead expenses and to wind up the work as soon as possible. One letter to the editor on July 27th from one who worked on the bridge made an interesting point. He thought that if Alderman Hamilton knew the workers did not do a normal day's work, he should have at the time informed the contractors, one of the superintendents, or one of the 6 foremen. He thought it was reasonable the city had specified workers had to come from the city. He added, "It is the working men of this city who have paid the biggest share of the expense." He also noted that the alderman commented on money wasted on wages, but said nothing about other wastes, such as runways built that turned out failures, and a tower built twice as high as necessary for the work it was intended to do. Arrangements were made to have the official opening on the bridge platform by the main entrance to Quaker Oats. The Honorable Dr. John Dowsley Reed, the Federal Minister of Railways and Canals, accepted the invitation to open the bridge on Civic Holiday Monday, August 8th. However, on August 5th, he had to cancel because the government of Arthur Meehan was meeting the new Governor General, Lord Byng. This meant no other cabinet minister would be available to attend either. The final compensation for Russell Townsend was settled near the end of August. The claim for extra work had been at $13,600. The city wanted to pay an even $5,000. Townsend would accept nothing less than $6,500, which had been the figure in the second motion on the day of the termination motion. After further review, Council accepted the compromise on September 7th. In his remarks, Townsend called the project a bad job for them. The company made little money and suffered from the negativity of the Examiner and City Council. That said, Townsend observed, "It's one of the biggest structures built in Canada without loss of life." That, he offered, was some consolation. As stated earlier, the bridge's original design was wide enough to accommodate a streetcar service to Ashburnham. But as we also learned, it was narrowed in an effort to save money, and plans had to be redrawn. On the bridge's completion, City Council approached the Hydroelectric Power Company, which had acquired the local power companies and the streetcar service 7 years earlier, to see if it were still possible to have a streetcar service using both the Ashburnham Bridge and the Inverleigh Bridge. When that option was priced, including the cost of 1 or 2 streetcars, Hydro engineers determined it wouldn't make economic sense, and that a bus service might be a suitable solution for the transportation of people between Ashburnham and Peterborough. As it turned out, in 1927, Hydro would replace its streetcar service in Peterborough with a fleet of buses. And while the Peterborough Examiner was pleased with the money saved by the bridge's reduction in width, its often critical view of the structure prevailed unfairly. But on the whole, people were pleased with the bridge. It had been a major accomplishment and would become increasingly important in the years that followed. The final tab for the bridge has been placed at $520,000. It's unknown if that figure included Barber's fee of $50,000. Regardless, the bridge would be finally paid off in 1950, amortized over the best part of 2 generations of Peterboroughans, for most of whom it was a symbol of civic pride. There is no doubt the Ashburnham Bridge was a major achievement. 100 years after what is now more commonly referred to as the Hunter Street Bridge was completed and open to pedestrian and vehicular traffic, it still boasts the same integrity and aesthetic appeal it enjoyed when it first opened a century earlier. While regular maintenance, including asphalt surfacing, replacement of damaged concrete, chipping, and terracotta features, The bridge has remained a reliable crossing since 1921, while along the way witnessing the many shops, eateries, boutiques, and other businesses that have changed hands or been replaced over the years on both sides of the bridge in East City and downtown Peterborough. When it counted most, the city stepped up to ensure a state-of-the-art structure that would help in keeping Quaker Oats from leaving town, at the same time ensuring no traffic gridlock when railway cars were delivering raw materials to Quaker and the company's product to customers across the country. The bridge was never blessed with an official opening, mainly thanks to the overshadowing issues connected to the impending 1921 Canadian federal election. A century later, Quaker, now merged with PepsiCo, remains an integral part of Peterborough and of the bridge it still proudly stands beside. Often used as a recognizable image for tourism campaigns to promote the beauty of Peterborough, the well-designed bridge by a leading architect and an outstanding engineer had created jobs for many of its citizens. And the Russell Townsend Company deserves much credit for its strict attention to the architectural detail of this magnificent structure. Claude Bragdon, in summing up his architectural life, observed, "Seek out the things that thrill you, and be sure there is beauty in them. For the test of all things is the measure of the joy they bring." He might well have been describing his experience with the Ashburnham Bridge.